Why can't I cry? Now, this is an age-long question that I think a number of people have asked themselves at one point or the other in their lives. Maybe you went through something where you felt like, I should have cried in this moment, but it didn't happen. Maybe you went through something painful, a loss, a heartbreak, or an overwhelming period in your life, but you still felt like I just couldn't cry. And this happens. Psychology has a number of reasons and explanations for this, and we'll get to that in a second. I know that when you go through that particular moment, some people even have fantasies that if I were able to cry, then this thing that's sitting on my chest or is weighing heavily on me, if I were just able to cry, then that thing would go away and I would feel better and I would feel okay. But it doesn't happen for some people, and then you feel stuck, or you start to feel like something is wrong with you. And I want us to speak about that today. But first, let's speak about the physiology of crying. So crying and tears are related to the body's parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the body's rest and digest system. This is what helps you conserve energy. This is also what helps restore your body to a state of calm after there has been stress. So crying is a biological way of regulating emotions, especially if you're experiencing something that's very overwhelming or trying to process something difficult. Now, I do have to pause here and say that this is the body's one way. It's one way of the body to regulate overwhelming feelings. There are other ways, and this is just to give grace to people who might find that they are able to access other ways of regulating their emotions physiologically rather than crying. So when someone can't cry, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't feel anything. Sometimes what it means is that there's something that is blocking that emotional release system. And that's what I want to talk about today. What are some of those blockages? The first blockage I want to talk about is emotional suppression. So there are psychologists like James Gross who study emotional regulation who have discovered that emotional suppression is the process of inhibiting the expression of emotions. So you feel something, but you don't allow yourself to show it. And this happens in cases where you grew up hearing certain narratives and rhetorics about emotions. So you heard, don't be sensitive, don't overreact, why would you cry over that? Why would you cry even at all? And because you hear these messages as you're growing up, you start to learn that maybe it's not safe to show emotions at all. Another blockage is emotional numbness and dissociation. So this is where you create distance between you and your feelings. And when numbness is present, when dissociation is present, then it becomes hard to cry actually, because in order for you to cry, you need to be able to access a certain level of intensity in terms of your emotional experience. And you actually need to be able to connect to your emotions in order for you to cry. So if you find yourself numbing or dissociating a lot, then it might be even harder for you to cry. Another blockage are your defense mechanisms. So these are your unconscious strategies that are meant to protect you from emotional pain and hurt. So for example, if you have someone who intellectualizes, and if you think about what intellectualization is, it's someone who thinks so that they don't have to feel. If that's how you cope and that's how you defend, and that's the mechanism that you use, then crying will be hard to access as well, because you're doing a lot of things to actually stop you from experiencing or being overwhelmed by your emotions. An interesting blockage when it comes to what stops you from crying are also family roles. So for example, if you grew up as the strong one in the family and everyone relied on you, then you learned how to keep things together and to hold things together for everyone else's sake. And that might be tied to your identity at this point, to a point where vulnerability and actually expressing your emotions feels very unfamiliar and very unsafe, because you are used to problem solving, managing emotions, staying composed for the sake of everyone else. And so that attachment to that role and how it closely links to your identity then becomes a hindrance and a blockage when it comes to you being able to cry and release emotional tension or strain. Another blockage are delayed emotional processing systems. So for some people, you can cry, you just don't cry immediately. So it happens after a while when you're able to access that emotional experience. And sometimes it happens very randomly. You could be watching something on the news, you could be watching a particular movie and someone dies in the movie, and then all of a sudden you find yourself crying, and you cry like unconsolably to the point where you wonder what it is that you're actually crying about. So that could be that you are a slow processor, so it takes some time for you to actually sit with what is happening, what am I experiencing, and then only after a while are you able to tap into that emotional experience and you are able to cry. And what happens for these people sometimes is that in the moment you temporarily hold back the emotion because you're trying to resolve the situation, you're trying to problem solve, and you're trying to navigate the situation. So you hold off on feeling something, and then once things have settled, you find that your emotional system then finally catches up to where you are. If you're enjoying this video, then it's probably because you're still trying to find the language for what's keeping you emotionally stuck. I've created a free quiz for you to understand and to identify what's keeping you emotionally stuck, what your emotional language and infrastructure looks like, and this will also give you access to resources that will help you get emotionally unstuck. If you would like further information, check out more information below. Let's continue with the video. So these are different ways that people defend and have learned to survive and protect themselves, which then becomes ways that also become hindrances when it comes to you being able to cry and be able to release, right? So if you feel like there's something that you're always holding on to that you can't really release, crying might be one way. Some people have found other ways which feel more authentic to who they are and where they are. But either way, there's something you experience that needs to be processed and needs to be let go of. So if you struggle to cry, it doesn't mean that you don't care. It doesn't mean that you're cold. It doesn't mean that you're broken. It just means that you've developed very strong protective strategies that are now limiting your ability to access your emotional experiences. So you may have employed strategies like suppression, intellectualization, numbing, or even withdrawing, and now it's hard for you to tap into your emotional experience and you feel quite disconnected from it. So over time, what healing would look like is that you would be able to connect to your emotional experience in a way that you are able to embody your emotional experience. So something I find a lot when someone comes to therapy is that they come in and then they tell you all of these life updates and things that have happened. So my mom did this, and this happened when I was 7, and this happened when I was 8, and grandmother did this, and this happened to me. And then I ask, how do you feel telling me this story? And a lot of people will say, I feel numb, I don't feel anything at all, or I don't really feel connected to this experience. And after they have told me this, it would be after a time where they've told me something really personal and deeply horrifying at some points or terrifying. And then they say, maybe I just wanted to get the story out so you get a better picture of me, but I don't really feel anything in this moment. I'm not really connected to any emotional experience during this moment. And what happens for those people is that your emotional experience is normally very far off or distant from your sense of self. So you can talk about your own lived experience, things that you have endured that have been horrifying or terrifying or just painful. And you can talk about it as though you're talking about someone else's life, right? That normally means there's a gap between your lived emotional experience and your sense of self. So in order for you to be able to cry, to get to a point where you're able to cry and be able to do that, you would need to lessen the gap between your lived emotional experience and your sense of self. And once that happens, you find that crying returns naturally and becomes easier. It's not something you should force, and maybe ideally it's not really a goal to look forward to, right? It's a byproduct of internal work that you would have done. But it's really something that signifies that you have gotten to a point where you feel like it's now safe to feel again. So that's the end of the video. I hope it helps you, and I hope it also gives you grace when it comes to you and understanding a bit more about who you are and how you've gotten to where you are. If there are certain moments during this video where you resonate with something or can connect with something, take some time to sit with that and really be curious and explore what that might be revealing to you about yourself. See you in the next video.